for over 35 years. Closer to maybe now by 40, but we're slowing down. And we've done lots of educating. By profession, I'm a teacher and guidance counselor, and then met Laurence and we went on the circuit together, but he was the pro and I learned a lot being out in the field.
That's holistic. We were on holistic lecture circuit.
And we did all kinds of alternative everything. So we started with health and healing, and we moved into environmental, and we did the conspiracy events. We worked almost anything and everything because we could. And it was exciting. So Laurence is going to today, his latest inspiration and excitement over what came out of Japan is the recycling of plastics and actually whatever and anything, so that we can reduce the carbon footprint by at least 80%. He is wanting to see this happen more globally. We need to do this in our local communities. It could be done in the backyard, but I think personally, if we can get communities involved, it will be great. There will be a lot more momentum behind it, and continue to spread out through wherever anybody lives. So with that, I'm going to let Laurence go ahead. He started to do an experiment with hydrogen with he bought this 74 Mark IV to experiment, and it's a gas hog. So he thought it was a good thing to prove. And Laurence, you're on.
Thank you. Well, with the time remaining, I'm going to have to backtrack at the end about some of this stuff, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background that she hasn't yet given you, just real quick. I'm going to take you back to 1957. I went in the Air Force, and the reason that I did was to pilot training, and I started with jets, and after I got my wings, my nose bled at high altitude, 40,000 feet. What is important there is that it put me into choppers, because that's the only thing that's low altitude that I could go back and retrain in. So that's what I did for 16 years, is choppers. If you remember the old program, MASH, those are Hueys, that's what I flew, okay? And 16 years because my physical caught up with me. All right, so now I won't belabor that. I'm only saying that what I did was, when there was free time, we had to be on the runway for crash rescue. And so this during the Cold War. And so instead of watching TV or something, I applied to the Air Force Academy for a correspondence course in fire science, which encompasses the full understanding of chemicals, fire, and all that. And so by doing that, I got a promotion on that one, and I'm equivalent to a bachelor's degree in civilian life, but there's no place for it in civilian life per se. I learned on that the very basic for what it's important to have for combustion. Combustion needs equal amounts of air, fire, and water, or fuel. Air, fire, and in my case it's water, okay, and fuel. And in order to have perfect combustion, and it just happens to be that I'm going to start talking about hydrogen first, that with hydrogen is a much more efficient fuel than gasoline. Gasoline is really a piss poor fuel. So hydrogen is about 5 times more efficient. So if you up the grade of the fuel, then you got to up the grade of the electrical to burn it, and the air, which air has a component in it that determines the burn, which is negative ions. It's negative ions are electronic molecule of oxygen. Without that, you don't really have them burn. And the most efficient system out there that has been, and I'm trying to use something like it, is Stanley Meyer's system, which they ended up murdering him about 20 years ago. And because the system was so, what do you say, who murdered him? Okay, obviously it's affect the oil industry. So anyway, they poisoned his coffee and he died. And right when he was going around the country pulling a dune buggy behind with a motorhome and running on water. Okay, now his system was the most efficient and still is. And just a brief rest so that you can look it up yourself. Stanley Myers filed the first patent, in Canadian patent, because he thought there would be threats to the U.S., and there was. And the Canadian patent names the component that, his secret component, so to speak, and when he went to file a U.S. patent, he realized the threat, so he had to call it an inerrant gas, what he was adding. And basically it's just air, okay? And that's what most of the systems that, and I have reference over here on all the different kits that are available and that you can get on the web, but very few of them have that concept, that what he was using. And what that mysterious item was, he called it inerrant gas. Well, anything could be inerrant that doesn't burn, right? So that led a lot of people astray. But when he filed the Canadian patent first, he named the gas, and it's nitrogen. Now, the nitrogen makes up 78% of the air that we breathe, all right? And without nitrogen, you can't strike a match. You can't have fire, okay? And so it's extremely important. And that was his secret, so to speak. That's why they murdered him, okay? So instead of everybody else, because a lot of people have been doing this for some time now. I've been doing it for 10 years. I've been going to car shows with my Classic, okay, and showing them what a gas hog, this Lincoln Mark IV, weighs 2.5 tons, and it's 22 feet long, and it's a gas hog. I mean, that's why I selected it, okay? Because it gets like 8-10 miles a gallon, okay, normally. So I figured if I could do that with this car, I could do it with anything, okay? So I converted it first and took it to classic car shows around the country, mostly within the neighboring 3-4 states, and demonstrated by having the hood up and letting them see how simple it is. Now, to give you an idea how simple that is, my first unit, I ordered the plans only, and that was over 10 years ago, so that was basically all that was available. Where now your kits are available, a lot of them. But 10 years ago or more, you know, you could get the plans, and I ordered the plans, and I had one of my car buddies in the car club called Valley Cruisers. We actually started it 13 years ago with the concept of doing this, but it never really happened, unfortunately. That's another story. But, so, the concept here of hydrogen is such that with this Lincoln, it was so simple to convert because it didn't have what our modern day cars, all these out here in front, have computers, okay? They have fuel injection system, most of them, and which are more efficient, but they all have computers. Now, in 1980, they came out with computers, and they're becoming more and more sophisticated as the time moves on. And so, my van here, it's got 7 sensors. And if you do one thing to alter your gasoline at all intake, like fuel-saving device or an additive even, the computer is insidiously pre-programmed, okay, to recognize it through its sensors and to automatically switch it such that it will just flood it right away with, it'll dump more gas in right away, okay? And I've actually put the car up on a rack, this one, and disconnected the exhaust pipe from the catalytic converter, which is a joke, and watch liquid raw gas running out the exhaust pipe, okay? That is your money going down the tubes, okay? So, now with that, I want you to understand that the hydrogen is really simple now with the kits that they've got. And over here there's literature of all these websites, little boxes that you could go to and you could pick up your own kits. Now when I got my first plans, I think I paid $60 for the plans on the web. And I had the very first unit made for this by one of my car buddies who was a little swifter than I was mechanically. And he made it up with 2 fruit jars and about $15 worth of parts, tubes and wires. That's it. Now, with no computer, all you have to deal with is that great big carburetor, big 4-throat carburetor. All right? So, just the alternator in the Lincoln, okay, was enough, more than enough, to be able to split hydrogen and oxygen in water. Okay, the alternators are so efficient now, or have been for a long time, about 40 years or 50 years almost, so that they're AC, and they only require, even with this big Lincoln with everything running electrical, still only would use maybe 40 to 60% of what the alternator is putting out, okay? And where do you think the rest of that goes? There's a thing called a regulator. And the regulator is insured to be able to take the extra amount of electricity that's wasted, basically, and put it in the ground. So all that's wasted. And you only need 20% in order to convert, be able to split oxygen and hydrogen and water from water. Now what you need is distilled water, which is dead water. Now, after doing this for 10 years almost, I discovered that there is actually something better than distilled water. And what makes water so incredibly valuable to us is vibrational frequency. Okay, so Sandra's got some cards up here that she deals and has dealt with for the last 5 years, a product called iWater. Okay, and what iWater is really made for the human body. But I figured out that if you can use it for the body and to the efficiency that it uses, then what would it do for an automobile? Okay, combustion for an engine. Well, I come to find out that, to my, not surprise, but to my amazement, that by taking distilled water and running it through this iWater thing, which is basically, if you all know who Nikola Tesla was, the alternating current and about every electrical thing that we're in, and robotics and everything else. This genius was created in the early 20th century, okay? And so he put us way ahead, and still today, his stuff is still probably the best out there of anything. People modify it, but rarely do they originate it. Now he would get a flash of genius, and there's actually a video out there called Flash of Genius on Nikola Tesla, and I will have it available. I ordered a brand new DVD and I've got a whole collection on Tesla stuff on documentaries, but this one goes more in depth. Like, he actually was the original concept of the flying saucer. Okay, electromagnetic field of the planet. He wanted to give the people free energy. Okay, and he could have accomplished that if he hadn't been stopped. So, without going too much into depth, just go in and Google in Nikola Tesla, and you come up with pages and pages and pages, okay, of documentation. And if it hadn't been that for Edison, which we had all learned in school as the big hero, okay, and he didn't invent any of this stuff. Okay, Edison wasn't even a good inventor. He was an entrepreneur. And he took other people's stuff and developed it, okay? And that's how he got to where he was. But by doing that, he suppressed Nikola Tesla. And J.P. Morgan, who was the financial backing, went for him and went against Tesla. And Tesla died in obscurity, okay, with hundreds of patents, okay, to his credit. Now, going back again to this, I just want to leave the hydrogen. There's a lot more, okay, to be able to go on, and I'll come back on anything else. And I just want to ask if there's any questions right now of something I haven't covered on hydrogen. Ask them now, okay?
You said your Lincoln was getting 8 to 10 miles to the gallon. What's it getting now?
Yeah.
Would you speak up? I got hearing aids.
You said the Lincoln was getting 8 to 10 miles to the gallon before. What's it getting now?
Oh, well, you can't even gauge it if it's just running straight hydrogen. This vehicle here, I went to the next stage, which is, which I'll talk about, which is a computer car, and using fuel injection system, which is a lot more efficient than carburetors, right? Okay, so if you can either run either or mix them. Okay, now this one I've got it so you can mix it, but right now under the hood, and I guess they didn't put the hood, yeah, I did. Okay, so that you can see it's only a little overflow bottle, basically a 1 quart bottle or 1 gallon bottle that I'm using because I couldn't get the tank right away and to be put in the back part of the car. So I have to get it, and I had a herniated disc, unfortunately, happened last fall, and it's kind of laid me down, and haven't been able to do it myself. I need an army, okay, basically. All right, so I can do either. I can mix them, and I've got a system called lean wean, which means you can lean in the amount of hydrogen or gasoline and wean out the other, okay, or mix them.
So your Lincoln's running just on water, not gas?
It can either way.
And what sort of performance does it get when you run it in that mode?
Okay, if it's actually better, it's better because it's carbon that kills motors and causes bad mileage, okay? So without carbon, your motors potentially can go 300,000-400,000, okay, instead of today's average, all right? And so carbon is the big enemy because it chews up the engine inside and causes bad mileage, okay? So if we can just get rid of the carbon, we're ahead of the game.
But what kind of horsepower is it getting?
Oh, you actually get better. The performance of the motor, now this is the biggest 460 is the biggest V8 that Ford ever made. And I was amazed at what kind of performance. I have it on video when it was first completed. Okay, what's the pictures here were taken. And Sandra filmed me as I was going down in front of my house over here on Central, and I had my hands up in the air and another person riding with me, and I wasn't touching the gas pedal, and it was going 10 miles an hour idling. Okay, now it didn't do that before. All right, now that was only the first surprise. Okay, the car club guys were shocked because I actually, one of the first car shows, I don't know, picture, anyway, yeah, like that one there, that I went to 10 years ago, I actually pulled out and there was a little bit of loose gravel just as I was pulling out onto the main road, and I laid rubber with that Lincoln. Okay, and everybody, see, because you don't do that with that big thing. Okay, so an automatic transmission and everything. So now I'm going to say that the next thing I had to approach was to improve the other parts of the fire triangle that I talked about. Okay, so first thing I did was address the spark, because being that fuel is 5 times more efficient, hydrogen, than gasoline, I had to have something that would burn it. Now, the spark plugs that we've been using, okay, more than 100 years have the same spark plugs. Okay, and you just, when I was a kid, and I didn't talk about that, when I was 16, I was already into hot rods, all right? And just preface it just a little bit on that. I took a 40 Ford and took the engine out of it because I found it only had 15,000 miles in a barn. And I restored it, but it wouldn't get out of its own way because with a little 90 horse motor, the guys would say, you can do better than this if you're gonna make it a dragger or something. And so they jerked it out. One of the guys worked at a junkyard and he found a Cadillac, a 53 for one of the first overheads, all right, Cadillac motor, and only had 17,000 miles, and they put it in that, and it liked to shake that thing to pieces because it wasn't made for that big Cadillac motor. Well, besides that, we took and made the Cadillac, the engine, almost full race. Okay, it had, I could go through the whole reference of things we did to it, but it had 4 carburetors on top, and this is before the blowers or superchargers. Okay, now when I got through with that, I raced it, a Saugus drag strip up against rails that had 2 engines, and the best time that they could turn was 104.5 in 1956, and with 2 engines, and that was, the back engine was a front was a full-blown Chrysler, and the back was an Allison motor. Anybody know what that is? P38 motor, made, okay, for an airplane motor. But it was too high geared, and it didn't get to the end of the drag strip and make any more than 104.5. So I went up against that, but the only way I could do it is the guys that built the motor for me, the rest of the club that I was in, they were little geniuses with cars, with motors, and they built that motor, and they said, well, the only way you're going to beat that time is do something a little more exotic on the fuel. So they built in a little tank, a little pump tank right behind the glove compartment, and I could get up to 85 miles an hour in second gear before hitting the end of the trap on quarter mile. When I shifted to third gear, they told me, now when you shift, pump that in, okay, this little cylinder, and I did. It went into the back of the fuel block on the from the glove compartment to the fuel block on the car, and I did that, and it threw me back in the seat, sort of like when I first did jets, okay? Threw me back in the seat, it laid rubber and shot flames out my side pipes. That was pretty impressive. However, the guys that had it was called the Bean Bandit, that I beat their time by 5 points, okay? And they offered me a trophy, and they came over with their privilege to check it, okay, and they did and couldn't see anything different about it. The flex lines were going in there. You can see surgical tubing. It's just gasoline, but they smelled on the track, smelled something different. You know, something ain't right here, man. Spanish, Mexicans. Okay, so they inspected, couldn't find him, so they had to give me the trophy, and appeared in front cover of Rod and Custom 1956, the 3rd issue, because it was really a show car. It was beautiful. It was made candy apple bronze paint job by the Barris brothers of Hollywood and so forth. So they had to go ahead and do that. But so I got a trophy on that, but they said don't ever do it again because you'll burn up that motor. Okay, it won't handle it. Now, what kind of fuel did I put in there?
Nitrous oxide.
Ether and alcohol. Which kind of gave me a little basis for the concept of what I've been doing now. Okay? So, that's just a little side story, briefly, and I was hesitant about telling him for the time involved. But basically, that's what happened with hydrogen. When you increase the spark, and to increase the spark, I took the 100-year-old, or we've had the same spark plugs for 100 years, okay, and replaced them with plasma plugs. Anybody heard of plasma plugs? Okay, so I used plasma plugs to be able to compensate for that fuel, to burn it. The next thing was air, and I didn't approach that until I got this. And then I realized that this has a computer, as all these do, and the Lincoln doesn't. So I had to get something that would offset the computer and offset the 3rd element in the fire triangle, which is air. Now, people say, even car guys would say, well, what's in air? And I'd say, well, what do you think? And they'd say, oxygen. It isn't oxygen, per se. It is the electronic molecule of oxygen, which is negative ions. Without negative, that's what keeps your brain alive, and the atmosphere. It's the spark, okay? Without that and nitrogen, you can't light a match, okay? So, there is a conference that goes on every year for the last 6 years, and I taught this guy, I introduced him to hydrogen. He's a boy genius, or a boy younger than I am, okay? He's probably in his mid-30s now, and he's half Japanese, and this guy and I would lecture in Spokane he would lecture on free energy devices, and I lectured, and all I had was a blackboard, and I just chalked, and I just lectured on the theory of hydrogen, just basically, and nothing to show. But he had free energy devices, little models that you could duplicate yourself. And so I was able to do one of those, and it was just perpetual. I know that the patent office says you can't have perpetual motion, but there it exists. Okay, so he's been doing conferences now. I had the stroke, unfortunately, so we had to quit 15 years ago. But he's been doing these conferences, which you can look it up on the web. I don't have paperwork on him. I'm going to put that phone or something on top of that. Thank you. And it just Google in free energy, and you'll come up with it. He does these conferences once a year in Hayden Lake area by Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. Okay, and his name is Aaron, and all of his research for the last 15 years or more, he's been able to, he knew that same thing would happen to him that happened to Stanley Myers. So as long as we have freedom of speech, First Amendment still, he figured it'd be all right. So he was going to originally but he doesn't make any devices. Although he brings in people, the top people from around the country, all right, that are doing free energy devices so that you can tell you how to do them, right? So that's the conference. And he gets people from all over the world that will pay $400 a piece, okay, for 3 days, all right, and $800 for a couple. And he gets like 200-300 people every time, okay? So I've gone as his guest over the last 4 times, and it has been rewarding. I get people all over the world. There's a lot more speculation and savvy on free energy and alternative in other countries, and you name it, European Union, whatever, Japan. By the way, just for a moment, the wife has got that little gold Prius, which we got a year ago, and it gets 50 miles to the gallon. Toyota was the first one that came out with a hybrid at the turn of the century. Now there's all kinds of others that are jumping on, and have been the last few years, that have been jumping on with the hybrids and electric cars. If you're familiar with the Tesla car, Musk, which is the president and genius who created that, the multi-billionaire, okay, the Tesla Motors, and that car is all electric. But the problem with all electric cars is, and it's been projected that it probably will, if we lose the grid system, there is no way to recharge electric cars, okay? Not if it's a straight electric. Now that's why I got the Prius, because it's both, okay? Now, Tesla sells a charging unit, like a home charging unit that you can charge it yourself, and he's set up all along the coast in the big cities and so forth. I think there's 2 in Missoula that are charging stations. But in the rural areas like this, if there's no electricity, if the grid goes down, you can't even pump one single drop out of the ground of gasoline, much less anything else. Okay? So it's something for you to think about, because the cars are then absolutely useless. Okay? Now I went to be able to go into something to solve that problem is this little golf cart, which I have today, and it runs on the solar panel on the roof. Okay? Now I've got a new panel that puts out 100 watts, and that's a far cry from the one that I started off with, but it's the latest, and it'll keep that battery fully charged, except in the winter or when you have to park it, for a long time, right? Then you have to plug it in. So that concept with the little golf carts, how I ran around the car shows, because we'd have as many as 300 cars, and I was a photographer. So to be able to shoot 300 cars, I had to be able to have something to get around, because the cane wouldn't do it, okay? So, and that's how I developed that golf cart, all right? Now I'm kind of getting off a little bit, but let me go back to, if there's any, oh yes, this unit right here I had made up for me, and I've got 2 of these. I got 2 generators. One's already hooked up in the house, and it'll run the house, pretty much most everything in the house, on this unit. This is what a hydrogen unit looks like, a small unit. This will produce 3 to 4 liters a minute, which ironically the Lincoln was running on about 5 or 6 liters a minute, okay, that big motor. So it doesn't take a lot. Now I've got another one that put in this one, and actually a spare that I was going to put in our other Chrysler Town and Country, just like this one with the computer. That brings up the other problem. the problem is, whether it's hydrogen or any other kind of fuel, you have to offset the computer. Because if you don't offset the computer, you'll find that maybe a week will go by, 2 weeks maybe, and you'll get spectacular mileage at first, like I did. I was getting between 45 and 50 miles to the gallon, and then I watched it slowly drop, okay? And it was going back to what the computer was pre-programmed to do, all right? So that created another, I had to go back to the, and putt, re-putt, and so to speak, and find out why. Okay, I'm not a computer person. And so I found out what was going on with computers, and then the guys that knew what to do, they said, oh, there's a chip out there people are making, okay, and it'll tell the computer the right thing to do, okay? So I wanted that chip, and they were making them for different kinds of cars. So you have to know exactly the make, model, the horsepower, everything, all the accessories. Excuse me. You have to know what all the accessories on the car are, because the computer will determine that. Okay? See, so I went looking for on the web as a novice. I went looking for fuel-saving devices. No, wrong area. There was nothing that you could do to the computer that was listed under fuel-saving devices. So I went back to my sources who knew what they were talking about, and I said, what's going on? And they said, did you look underneath independent truck drivers or racetrack drivers? I said, no. They said, do that and don't look for fuel-saving devices. They want to stay alive. So look for performance modules. Okay, that's big. Word performance equates into savings. Okay, in other words, if you get better performance, you obviously get more horsepower, to answer your question, and more performance. Okay, and the engine will last longer. So I found one that you have to tell them exactly what the car you have and all the accessories and everything, and then they send it out, and it just sits on top of the engine module, which is the computer feed up, and the wires that you pull the wires on it, the instructions come with it. It's really simple, and you just plug it back in with this module, and it corrects the computer. It doesn't, because if you disconnect the computer or modify it at all, nothing works. Okay? So you have to have precision engineering, which is what I got on that. And it's just a module. Now it was like $70 a couple years ago, and it's not that much. But it prevents it from going backwards. Okay? Now, anyway, back to this, that this is a small version. This will run a generator. Now, I want to say that for the purposes of the camera, whatever, I was instructed, because I get a lot of my information in lucid dreaming or early morning stuff. And that's because I had a death experience in me before the stroke, and I was able to start doing that. And in the lucid dreaming, I got the information as long as I follow the instructions, but they don't tell me exactly how to do it. It's abstract. They give me abstract concept, maybe a picture, so to speak, of what it's supposed to do, and I got to do the work. Okay? They don't take your free will from you. Okay? And I say they, whatever you call it, whatever you want. Okay? Angels, high self, whatever you want to call it. But that's what I work with. And that's what everything that I've gotten has come from that source. Now this, I was shown in the bigger model, as I said, 2 fruit jars and everything with this, but I had to go to a more sophisticated version in order to go up for something that would work on a truck or work on more horsepower or whatever, be more efficient, okay? And so this is enough to run a generator, okay? My generator runs on both propane double system and gasoline, okay? But my concept was that what I haven't gotten to yet, the plastic gas, is going to be the gasoline substitute, and the hydrogen is going to replace the propane, okay? So this unit is going to go on to that unit. Right now it's hooked up on propane, all right, and gasoline double system. All right, so now there's not anything complicated about this except that you have to use highest grade stainless steel plates that you can get your hands on. And there's pictures, I've got pictures in here of what happens right here if you don't, if you use stainless steel plates that are not the highest grade. And this is from one website that shows what happens when you use it, other than the very best possible stainless steel plates, which is what I've got here, okay? And again, you can go through here and you can pick up the websites, as it's not on this material here, but it's in here, and you can pick up that, and it tells you the pros and cons of it. So that's the one drawback, and I advise that if you're trying to make it yourself, you get some guidance, because you can look at the manufacturer that the guy that built it, he went into making them here, and then there's others, okay? So it's just an in, you just got an in and an out, and that's it. And it's under pressure, and it's very simple, okay? But I advise that you have professionals do it, because if you don't know what you're doing, you're not. It just doesn't take much to make it wrong. All right. Now this unit here, that's in this vehicle right here, was made was the same kind of unit that I was going to put in the Lincoln, and decided to put it in here. All right. So if there's any questions on the literature that I put out here on hydrogen, and I'm approaching the other fuels in a minute, then you should ask now, so that I can jump to the next thing. Okay. Nothing? Yeah, everybody feels confident.
The mileage on the
It's a very simple unit.
back to the Lincoln. What kind of mileage did you get with it?
On hydrogen?
On the Lincoln.
Um,
Well, if I'm running straight hydrogen, it's hard to determine, because you're only using water. I mean, you know, I could get about, well, on this one, I get about, well, in the Lincoln, I'd take it to car shows, and it had an overflow bottle too to start with.
Yep.
And I could get about 60 to 80 miles on a gallon of water
I don't know. Did you show them?
on that.
Lawrence, so you're telling us that you actually ran that only on the hydrogen made from your 2 fruit jars, which is an immersion system, which I might point out, that's the advantage of this type of unit, is you don't have to immerse the electrodes in water, because they circulate. The kind with the fruit jars, you had all the wiring and everything is immersed in the
Well,
electrolyte.
that was the first one I got.
one.
And you ran that Lincoln only on
But
those?
I would run about 85% on this one, until I went to a more sophisticated. I bought the first unit for this, and it about 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, after I had run it on the other one, the cheap unit, and I took it to car show just to show that you could do cheap. You know, it's not an expensive operation.
Right.
Okay, as long as you know what you're doing and no computer. Okay.
Right.
See. So, but I went to this so that I could go 100%, and a double system, which I call lean wean, and there's a switch on below on my dash, and an amp gauge, amp meter, and the amp meter is like a gas gauge. It tells me that it's making hydrogen, okay, to how much, okay, it's making the hydrogen, and the switch back and forth to, I can switch or blend the fuels, lean, wean. So if there's not any more questions on the hydrogen, I need to jump to the, and that's why I got all this literature, because you can go like that far piece of paper with all these little websites that feature different versions kits. And I said my first one was $600. I put in the Lincoln to, and it was a bigger unit than this, and it was in a box, okay, to protect it, and it still sits in front of the grill, but you can look through the grill. And I did it that way on purpose to keep it cool, because it runs a little on the warm side sometimes, and also so people can look right through the grill, this fancy grill, and see the unit, okay? And otherwise all you see is what you see in here, is you just see the overflow bottle, the mixing bubbler they call it, and the tube, and the wires that are going to the battery, which is basically being run on the alternator, okay? So that's all there is to it.
So you were running this on a straight DC 12 volts. You're not using any pulse DC or anything. Just
No.
a straight 12 volts.
Straight 12. As a matter of fact, it's just you only need 20% of what that alternator's putting out, okay?
You got a big
The
arm.
rest of it goes into ground. I mean, well, you only need, the Lincoln would only use 60% with everything on, full blast. And that left 40%, which only 20% is all that's required to split oxygen and hydrogen, okay, in water. Now, I don't think I finished my concept about, well, maybe I did, on the eye water, which is what Sandra in her cards here, she can inform you, she's a distributor. The eye water is incredible for the body because the cells allow it to slide through and energize the cells, where regular water, including distilled water, has a little harder time going through. That's what makes it, it's like a lubricant in the sense that gives the cell what it needs. Now, I figured out that a car is the same way, and combustion engine is just the imagination of our lungs and system and so forth. So I figured that I could do that, and I videotaped it, and you could actually see the first time I did it, I didn't know what I was doing. I would happen to go in the kitchen. She had the unit that she sells as a distributor, and it has a little Tesla unit on top that's firing about that much gap of frequency, you can't see it, down into the water. Now, in order to be able to run the system through the Lincoln, I had to have distilled water before. But what I did was reverse that and be able to take distilled water and run it through the eye water system, which increased the frequency considerably, okay? And then the next shock came that when I put that in the Lincoln, 10 miles an hour down the road on idle was one thing, but the next thing that happened is I picked up mileage going to a local car show that was out on the highway, okay? And I picked up mileage gauged by the fact I had the golf cart follow me behind because I was using that and showing it, and then got a governor on it, so it's only 15 miles an hour top, right? So he was gauging what was going on with that right behind my Lincoln. No, excuse me, the other way around. The Lincoln, I was following him right behind the golf cart. Now he was only going 15 miles an hour, and so when I used the eye water charged up, distilled water, high charged up, I was able to increase the amount of performance to the point where I picked up at least another 15%. Now, what gave me the clue on what was going on there is that I observed in our kitchen where she was making the water going through it was going through firing, the top was firing down into the water, and I saw this rainbow thing come out. The sun was coming in the back window in the summer like this, and it was throwing a rainbow on the floor. Now the floor is a tile, multicolored floor, so I couldn't really tell on the color, but it was pretty distinct. And it wasn't a bow, it was straight lines of color bands. And so what that told me is it was splitting in the color range, okay? And then the next thing I looked for, and she saw it first, was that if you look across the top of the water, there was a gap, an air gap like that, you could look across the top of the water and you would see a ripple effect that was called tension, water tension. And that would be because it was firing, you couldn't see anything else, was firing in there, it was invisible, but it changed the water so that it had tension, surface tension, right? That to me told me, in my knowledge in physics, that something was going on with that unit, okay? So that's how I surmise that I'm to use what I told you the first time, okay? Use it in the Lincoln because the frequency has changed. Everything on this planet is frequency. It's all in the design. And if you get a handle on the frequency like Tesla did, everything was frequency, okay? And that he worked on. And he would conceive it one time in a flash of genius, and he would go right to the working model and tell his men to build it exactly the way he drew it out and not change it. They never had to go to from prototype to a production model. He went right into production because he never had to change it. That was how that genius worked, a flash of genius. Okay, and Edison, when interviewed what genius was about, he said the opposite. He said, what was genius? About 97% perspiration and 1% inspiration. Okay? And exactly opposite of that with Tesla. He conceived it originally and put it right into working model. Alright? See, so that was the difference, and that was how I'm been able to get an edge on the information, because I'm not a physicist, and my lack of chemistry goes back to my college days, and I had to start all over again with this stuff, okay? Because they don't teach this stuff in school. Even in physics, everything that they teach you is basically inherently wrong, okay? There's a flaw in all of it, even our mathematics, okay? And if you watch that recent series on Einstein, he alluded to the same thing, okay? All right? So, if there's any more questions on this, on hydrogen, then I'll go to the next step, which is plastic gas.
Yeah.
Okay? Now I'm going to cover a couple of different alternative stuff. And one of them, maybe I ought to go, okay, this is plastic gas. Maybe I ought to say something about the other two. They're out on the table there, then don't take them though. Okay? Now there's, our combustion engines are nothing but converted steam engines. That's all. And they've been that way for 150 years. They haven't made any changes, basically. In 1956, our car club, when I was only 16 before I went in the Air Force, went down to a big showroom in San Fernando Valley in North Hollywood, some spotlights in the air to see what Chrysler was going to put into production, which was a turbine motor. I have pictures of it, and it has since time, I've got articles written on it, I got those. All right, and this was 1956, right? And I went and looked at it, and the guy put a glass of champagne on the roof and let it idle, you know, and there's no shaking whatsoever. And the only modification he told me that they had to make was in the muffler system because flames would shoot out the tailpipe. right? Like a jet, right? Okay, so they were suppressing that, and that was it. And otherwise it ran quiet, just like that little Prius does, okay? You can't hear it run, all right? Now the turbine motor, just a real quick sideline, and I went into advertising after the Air Force. I came back out after I got physically that I couldn't, and they had to put me in reserves. It was either that or a medical, and 16 years. And I went into advertising, and I went back to college on the GI Bill, and I learned some things about what we don't learn, okay? And so that kind of, after my death experience, I pursued the paranormal because of that, all right? Paraphysics, I lectured for 10 years with a man by the name of Dr. Fred Bell. Now they murdered him too, and he was a previous NASA physicist that was a genius on IQ of 186 and a photographic memory. He even looked like Tesla in his early days, and spooky, okay? Little thin mustache and everything. Okay, anyway, this man, he got together with me because he could see, well, I could measure energy other than normal measurements, so to speak. Paranormal, like Kirlian photography, could measure the energy field of the body, which I developed my system after at UCLA with Dr. Thelma Moss, who brought it back from the Soviet Union. And I learned a lot on that. You can photograph the energy field of the aura of the body quite easily using Tesla equipment, which is basically high frequency, high voltage. Okay, the Russians are great at nabbing things and taking credit for themselves, and they did with this that they call it Kirlian photography, because Samian Kirlian was accredited with it, and he didn't invent it, Tesla did. Okay, and I have photographs of him using it way back in the 1910, 15, like that. And then it went clear up to just before the war, about 1937. We didn't acknowledge it, okay? And along with, like a lot of other things with Tesla, he died in the middle of the war, 43, and we didn't acknowledge Kirlian, but two researchers wrote a book about it, and right in the United States here. And the Russians grabbed it, and Samian Kirlian claimed that he created it. Well, he didn't. Okay, anyway, they now know it's electrophotography. And so, and the point is that you can measure that, you can measure things, and also I was a really good dowser. I started off with medical dowsing, and I could do real good with that, and I was trained in Touch for Health, or muscle testing, applied kinesiology. So there was 3 double-check ways to be able to measure what was going on in the human body. So he liked that because this man was brilliant enough and had the wisdom that he realized that your intellect will lie to you for convenience, to make it easier on your ego or what you desire emotionally. Okay, so it'll lie to you if it's convenient, and so you can't trust the intellect. The intellect is the left brain, which I lost in my experience with the stroke. I ended up losing the intellect, or the left brain, and I only had the right brain. Okay, and my neurologist said, well, here's the bad news. He said, and I kept bugging him to, but you mind putting something on those, okay, and glass or something. And here, you can put that on some one of them. And thank you. And my neurologist said, The bad news is I kept bugging him to rotor-rooter because I unplugged main artery that fed the brain, and there's only a couple hours time period that you can do anything about it. The cells start dying in the brain. So I kept bugging him. I said, can't you open that up and get me some circulation up there and get the brain functioning? He said, no. The bad news is, I'm tired of you asking me. He said, this is a VA, okay, neurologist. He said, I'll show you the MRIs for the last 2 years when they realized I was going to live. At first it was doubtful. And he showed them to me, and he said, now you see, there's nothing there. You've lost your intellect, your left brain. And he said, now, I said, is there any good news? And he said, the good news is, look at all these new neural passageways going from one side of the brain to the other. He said, how do you do it? We don't know how you do it. And I said, you're the neurologist and you're telling me you don't know? I don't know how I do it. And he said, well, we'll document you, and they've been doing that. Okay, so I operate on only one side of the brain. Now, that's sort of like being half-assed in a way, but if you understand how Tesla operated, that the female side, the right brain, is the real creative genius. The left brain, which we depend on in our society for the most part and geared for, is simply a computer that the right brain feeds the material into. That's all. It's just a computer. And it will lie to you, okay, for convenience of the ego. See? So, developing of your right brain, which is in the paranormal sciences, is where it's really at. That's where genius, that's where they thought, they carved up his brain after he died, Einstein, thinking it was physical, and it isn't physical, okay? See? So, the fact that they thought that Einstein was the epitome of left brain intelligence. He was very right brain, not left brain, okay? And as a matter of fact, the old standing joke is, I had an old friend of mine who's now dead who was sitting in one of his lectures, and he said that the story was that Einstein was about 10 minutes late into it, and he was sitting right in the front row at Stanford University, and Einstein, came from out in the hall and looked in like, am I in the right place? Like this. And then, and he came in, and he got up on the platform, which was eye level to this guy, and he sat down and pulled up pant leg when you sit down, and he had 2 different colored socks on. He didn't have time for that mundane stuff, okay? So that's the series that on Einstein's life that they showed on what was
National Geographic,
National
and Ron
Geographic.
Howard is producer.
Will give you a perspective on what that man went through, and you find the same thing if you go all the way back to when I went to college, physics was Newtonian science, okay? And basically Einstein was too new on that in that respect, and was still operating on Newtonian science. Well, Sir Isaac Newton was really not a heavy intellect. He was, if anything, he was an alchemist. You know what an alchemist is? It's metaphysical, all right? He was looking for turning, there you go, turning base metals like lead or something into gold. That was his desire. But
You have about half hour.
half an hour,
Well,
okay. I got off on my stories.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
get the
point is,
recycle. Yeah.
forgive me, but the fact is that that's not where genius comes from. And Tesla was the same way. It wasn't intellect. It was the right brain, which is, girls, it's the right brain is where the genius comes in, okay? And there's a lot of men, of course, function on the right brain too, all right? Now, all right, so now we need to go to this. And I should, before I'd like to finalize with that. Let me just say there's some articles here, maybe you can find them, dear, that a combustion engine is again nothing but a converted steam engine that we had 200 years before the combustion motor, right? And it doesn't take a genius to be able to modify it. That's all we've got to be able to make it perform as a combustion motor. Now, has anybody heard of the Oldsmobile brothers? Okay, well, Henry Ford wasn't the first production line. That's what we're taught in school. He was the first mass production, but the first production line, 2 or 3 cars a day, was the Oldsmobile brothers. And they were making a custom order, so to speak. You could have a steam engine, and by the way, the Stanley steamer is a bum rap, okay? That was disinformation that it was dangerous. And or you could have electric. And if we'd have gone forward with electric, we wouldn't be like we are today, which is totally dependent on oil, right? It runs this planet. It's very insidious, all right? And it's screwing up the planet as well as our bodies. Okay, so I would say that, to tell you that, so you have an understanding of what it is, you can practically run anything through a combustion motor. I mean, the fuel that we use is so poor. You know, how many of you remember when the leaded gas, when they quit that, right? Because environmental problems, right? So we went to the fuel we use today. Well, did you know that the government already had that fuel and was holding it back because they didn't want people to know about it unnecessarily, okay? And when we had to switch from that to what we have today, okay? How many of you seen the Exxon advertisements? I actually handled that account once in advertising. Tiger in your tank, right? Well, what do you think that tiger in the tank is, right? It's called RXP, and you can find it on the market, on the web. They make it, bottles of it, and you can buy it. And what it is that there's a whole video about it, that in 1944, at the close of the war, among other things that the Germans, the Nazis were developing, they created, well, we put them on an oil embargo to help end the war. And Hitler just put the pressure on the scientists, and they didn't have any oil, but they had a lot of coal, which is hardened oil, in Bavaria, okay? So what did they do? They created clean coal, yeah, okay, which is not what they've been trying to create here, and that's just scrubbing the sulfur out. But what the Nazis did is they used a refining process for coal, and it runs better than oil, okay? See, even with all that carbon in there, which is oil hardened as coal, okay? So, what the Nazis did was create this fuel to run in their tanks, and then they had some very efficient Panzer tanks, Panzer tanks, yeah, that were running circles around the Allies, but till we ran them out of gas in South Africa, okay? But those Panzer tanks were actually running on the alternate fuel, okay, which is this RXP. That's what you use, that's what you pick up in the pump right now today. It's not just Exxon and Conoco and all that. They're the ones that advertise it, but it's the top of the fuel. And by the way, there's really no difference in octane between your low grade. This Lincoln and this car run on 85% octane, okay? I get 85 to 87. This Lincoln, when I had this same model brand new when I was in advertising. That's why I wanted this, okay? And if you put in the old fuel anything other than 91 octane in it, okay, it would ping like hell, right? Now, it doesn't. On 85, it runs fine. Okay? So all you're paying for is advertising, the difference between those three fuels. That's just another way to gouge you. And that with the RXP, they put just enough of that, our government, RXP in there when they had to pull it from the back burner to replace leaded fuel. Just enough to get it so that it's functional, so that it doesn't ping, right? That's all. Not enough to make real spectacular gas mileage, which you should get when you're running fuel injection system, computer, and so forth. You should. But they don't tell us any of that, okay? Because why? They don't want us to know. Why? Because do you have any idea how much money, revenue comes from the gas pump? Okay? Go look at your gas pump. On there, when you pump your gas out, it shows what the tax is on it. State and federal tax, right? How much, take a guess at how much percentage on an average, just Montana, how much do you think is taxes?
Third, probably.
Say half. Let's say half.
No, it's not that bad. 37%. If you take and look at those two together, 37% of every dollar, that's 37 cents, is going to taxes. And if they ever take that away, if they ever lost that, our government would practically collapse. It's so dependent upon that tax alone. Okay? So there's no way, and supposedly it keeps our roads up and all that, but it's not that. That's not the point. Okay? It's cushy money. All right? And it's because of the petroleum industry. That's why we give the edge to the petroleum industry. Okay? So that's what goes on with your taxes and with the support. Now I guess I better go back to this. Oh, I started to say that there's anything, just about anything you could burn through a combustion engine, which I'd like to briefly talk about alcohol, and that's what this Plastigas is. Basically, concept. Right here, there's I think there's an article there on showing African girls, little girls in Africa, that are running combustion generators because in Africa, in the primitive areas, they don't have electricity like we have. All right? So concept, if they want to watch the television or something, they got to have a generator. So they got ingenuitive about it and grabbed one of the advisors that would tell him, that was a chemist, and they found out that you could run in a generator, you could run just about anything. It's such a simple motor. So that they started off with a pregnant girl, which is a little more concept, or a little more concentrated in Europe. You know what Ura is? Urine. Okay? And pure Ura, the laboratories will actually buy it in purified state, and it will burn. Okay? It burns very dramatically. Okay? So they created this by taking girls that would pee and run it through this little distillation system, and run their generators on pee. All right, the article's right here. You can see that. Now, if Africa can do it in primitive stage, where are we at? Where are we at with this stuff? You know? I mean, that just shows you. And alcohol. Alcohol has been around for a long time. Farmers been running alcohol in their tractors and their systems for a long time. And the story on the Oldsmobile brothers is that they were producing the steam and electrical, and they were creating a couple of cars a day, and then came a hot shot after the oil industry was established thanks to Rockefeller, Standard Oil, right? These hot shots from New York came in and said, we want you to see this new converted steam engine that runs on gasoline. They said, what's that? Well, how are we going to have it? Is it free? No. You have to buy it, but there'll be pumps all over the country, they were projecting. And they said, well, we run water and electricity. And imagine now, the electric cars, if we would have stayed with that, they would have made them more efficient. But what we have today with the Tesla car as an example. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. And they said, you better do it, convert over, or else. And they weren't kidding, meaning that's it, shut you down, okay? Or you end up dead. So they converted. That's where the first gasoline motors were established, okay? And of course, by the time Ford picked it up, and, you know, he wanted to put one, a Ford in every garage, and he did, and that was his genius. He was a genius, but he had to go with what there was, oil. Okay, so you can, I just use that extreme because you can burn alcohol, you can burn just about anything through these engines. Okay, the computer, of course, in all these is going to put up a fit. I mean, it's going to try to regulate it. Okay, so you have to have something to offset it. Right? That's why you have to do that. Plastic gas. Finish up with this. This is my pet project, but unfortunately I developed a herniated disc last fall, and I've been strapped down to back to the wheelchair and off the cane since then, and I need an army, at least a couple people, to help me with it. Okay, so I've taken it to this stage, all right, which is the logo, all right, shown to me in a dream, all right. I'm not the originator of it. If you go to the web and Google up, if you go to Tube and you Google up, first do this so that you understand what you're up against. Google up plastic paradise, and what you do, what you'll come up with is a very well made documentary that shows you that there's 5 islands out in the Pacific that are nothing but plastic. One of them is the size of Texas, okay? And they don't know what to do about it because no country will take responsibility or expense to clean up the mess. It'll take millions of dollars to do that. Now, there is a young fellow that's a genius in his own right who found a way to do it with wave action, so you don't have to spend millions of dollars by just harnessing that. That alone was genius. But it's going to take him 10 years to clean up that mess, okay, out there. And nobody does, he's starting to get, I think he's got his first million by people to see what he's trying to do. And he's got his prototype built, but it'll take a while. So the problem is plastic, all plastic out there, courtesy of DuPont, or it started the whole thing, is a petroleum product, okay? Now, if it was once a petroleum product, it'll again be a petroleum product when it's reduced to its finest element, which if you put it in a pressure cooker under 800 degrees, okay, it melts and turns to liquid. And then the next thing happens is that it turns to vapor, it goes out through nothing but, looks like a still, and cooling tube and into water, and it goes up, bubbles up to the top of the water because it's lighter than water. It's like mineral oil, and you scoop it off. It's 85% less carbon and smoke, and to say that's nothing compared to what it does in performance in an automobile. What kills motors is carbon and hurts mileage, okay? So you can get so much more longevity. I mean, you can project about 400,000 miles on an overhaul instead of these things. 100,000, maybe 200, okay? Because of carbon. Carbon chews them up, okay? See? So if you start off with a clean burning fuel, you don't have that problem. And your motors, they don't want your motors to last longer. They don't want your cars to last. They want you to junk them out every 5 or 10 years, okay? And cars today are being purchased by college students and so forth. Young people are buying them on credit cards. Now what kind of nonsense is that? They wear out long before they're paid for, okay? So with plastic gas is what the name that was shown to me, okay? And with plastic gas, with the system, if you write this down, you can go in and see it for yourself, okay? And I think it's on one of these sheets that you can. What happened is this Japanese physicists go to the plastic paradise and see how it's killing birds, it's killing fish, killing coral reefs. It's making this ocean a toilet, okay? And that's what we live on. That water is what makes this planet livable, okay? So, I'm going to tell you that it's vital, all right? So, if you eliminate that problem, you eliminate with our water. We no longer, how many of you watched the news just the last couple of days where that in Texas with the Harvey, the big refinery caught fire because it got flooded, because it's chemicals, right? And another one, chemical plant, both, and flooded and caught fire. Those are hazardous materials that we shouldn't be using, okay? Refining is not rocket science. You go onto the web and you punch in plastics to oil, and not fuel, but oil. You can try fuel and probably come up with it, but you'll see 2 pages at least of backyard grassroots guys with primitive equipment, just really primitive. Look like the old whiskey stills, right? And they're making this. And they tell you, a couple of 3 or 4 of them will show you exactly how to do it. They videotaped it on really primitive equipment, all right, that anybody could do. See? So the secret is recycling. Our landfills are full. Plastics will last 1,000 years, okay? And they're full. The ocean's full, and we can't handle it anymore. And yet we just keep doing it. Everything's plastic, 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 right? And we could turn that into the most valuable. It would be, instead of the black gold, it'll be clear gold, okay? Because it's a tremendous market. I tried to get something going right here in this community, and when I was told Sanders County is doing recycling, and I said, which is our county, I said, why can't we do it like you're doing right down in Plains? And they said, can't, because the tribe runs this area. All right? When talking to the tribe, come to find out that they tried recycling a number of years ago, and people were too damn lazy to clean up and separate their stuff. Now, glass has a real value to it too, but those are the 2 elements that most recyclers do not want to deal with. Okay, there's no money in them. They take it on simply because they have to in order to get the aluminum and tin, cardboard, and such. Okay, they have to in order to do it. All right, so they're more than happy to turn that over to you because there's no money in it. And yet it's gold, all right, if it was handled correctly this way. And all you need is nothing but a whiskey still in your backyard. individual people can do it, or it can be done on a community basis. Okay? So that's what I tried to do, but unfortunately I got knocked down with this, with the stroke, and then with this back thing now, the most recent thing. So I can't do it by myself. I need manpower. I need help. Okay? I thought maybe the tribe would come to my rescue, but they got discouraged. Okay? Because of the previous attempts. So if anybody has any ideas, sure, I need funding, but I also need manpower. You can't do it. I couldn't do it if I had $1 million behind me. I'd have to hire people to do it. Okay? Yeah.
Maybe putting a deposit on every plastic bottle so that they turn them back in to get their money back somewhere.
That's right. Actually, that system has been projected, where if you see on the plastic bottles, some of them in California, Oregon, I think was one, so forth, they have a recycling coupon or the value to that plastic. And they can't make the plastic any thinner. You know, it's almost dangerous, it's so thin. You know? So it's just a matter of that. Paulson has a very efficient system that was established, and Sandra knows the gal that got it in, but there, even at that, you can't, it says right on the bins, clean off, no tissue, no food, and have the right symbol on there for your plastic and your glass. Now, right now, there's a tremendous amount of effort being put into crystal, and the crystal sand, which is the most abundant thing on the planet, is silicone. Okay? It's just hardened water. That's what it means. Crystal is a Latin word for meaning crystallis, means hardened water. Okay? And right now there's a big push in Wall Street for taking and converting sand, crystal sand, into the next gold. Okay? Because they found a way to use crystal in that form to be able to energize energy. Just like it's another version of solar, but a little different take on it. Okay? That will create a free energy for us. And it's the most abundant element on the planet. The second most abundant is limestone, which is what the Great Pyramid is made out of. And that has another function that nobody's paying attention to. And another product that they gave me 25 years ago was being able to take limestone sand and mix it with turkey manure or ammonia extract, and you have something that's better than cement and better than plastic, and they won't let it into this country from Canada. And the man that has the patent on it may be dead by now. He was the professor of physics or chemistry and physics at in BC, Canada, at the university. So I couldn't get that off the ground and put a lot of money into that effort for 10, 15 years. And you can foam it, you can set it up that you can mold it, you can gunite with it, and it's far better than cement and plastic put together. Okay, doesn't crack, doesn't seed, and doesn't have set up in about 7.5 minutes, just like steel. Okay, do you hear about it? No? Okay, but that's just another one of the things that I got from my source, and I was ignorant. I didn't know about it. So, is there any questions on what I've covered so far? I guess I'm out of time. Or the plastic gas. And I asked for a mailing list. If you put down your email and address, whatever, then I can, and I got business cards up here. You can email me, or I can pick up your email and keep you abreast what I've done with all my students, and I've taught school for a long time in this principle, and keep you abreast on this, and maybe some cooperative stuff. The whole thing about what this weekend showed is coming together, all right, and at a grassroots level. And permaculture is food, right? I mean, that's why they're putting all this energy into it. But look at all the other stuff that's associated with it, and see, including the fuel. You've got to have fuel. We can't go backwards. We can't. Evolution shows that you don't go backwards. You have to go forward, right? So we don't go back to, if we suddenly lost the grid system, or thank God, no more oil or whatever, or we wouldn't go backwards, right? We would progress, because that's the way the whole system is set up. So it's just a matter of doing it now, where it's painless to do it as a group, or more geniuses and more people that try to, like Tesla and so forth, that try to bring this forward for humanity to save the planet and save us, because we're in critical mass right now. Just this year is the first time in recorded history that we've gone over the mark, meaning that we're polluting the planet faster than it can recover. Okay, and all you have to do is look at what's going on with the ice caps and the Antarctica and so forth. We're losing our animals and so forth. The die off. We're in the sixth. What's the word? The word for termination.
Extinction.
We're in that sixth stage, okay, of this planet, all right? And if we don't turn it around, then it's going to be serious. It's already serious. There's already those that believe that we can't reverse it, okay? And as long as, and whatever your political views are, as long as we have somebody like our president today that thinks it's disinformation, it's a hoax, you know, when it's right in his face, as long as you have that kind of mentality, then we're just a big, deep hole we're just digging for ourselves.